Hello mathematicians, today's video is on Objective 108, which is students will be able to find factors and GCF to reduce fractions. So students will be able to find factors and GCF to reduce fractions. If you need to go ahead and pause the video so you can copy it on the objective, do that now. So before we get into what GCF is and what factors are and how we find GCF, let's define two terms for ourselves. The first term is the word factor, and a factor is a number, and again remember I'm using that symbol to represent number, a number that goes into another number evenly with no remainder. A number that goes into another number evenly with no remainder. And what we mean by no remainder, just to clarify that, is no remainder means no decimals or no remainder of 0. These are whole numbers. I'm sorry, not no remainder of 0, a remainder of 0, meaning it's a whole number. So, just to give you a quick example of what that might look like, if we had something like 6, what is the factor of 6? We're thinking of what's a number that goes evenly into 6? Well, I'd say 2 and 3 because 2 times 3 is 6. Okay, so both 2 and 3 are factors of 6. Okay, it'll make a little bit more sense as we get down below and do a couple more examples, but that's just to give you a heads up of where we're going. All right, and then product. This is a quick reminder, but product, just to remind you, means multiplication. It's the mathematical word that we use that stands for multiply. So, just to see what something could look like if we're dealing with factors and we're dealing with multiplication, let's say I gave you something like 10 times 5, and 10 times 5 is 50. Okay, this is the product and 10 and 5 are both factors. So we multiply the factors to get our product 50. So 10 and 5 are factors of 50. Okay, if you need to pause the video and copy down any notes, this is the time to do it. We're going to go and get into the objective and what we're actually going to learn today. Okay, so we are going to first find factors of the number. One of the biggest mistakes that students make is they talk about factors or they talk about least common multiples, is that we confuse factors and multiples. And so I'm going to teach you today a way to always remember what a factor is, and that is with a cow. Now, you might be saying, what does a cow have to do with a factor? Nothing. Okay, it's just a really creative, easy way to remember, so that when you're taking a test and you see the word factor, you think factor cow, and you think, oh, factors are the numbers we multiply to get another number. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to zoom into this first example. Okay, you can see the directions up top. So example 1 says, find all factors of 36. So I'm seeing a couple of things as I read this. I'm seeing find all factors. And I have to remember, okay, a factor is something that we multiply together to get another number. We multiply two numbers to get another number. That is a factor. So the first thing we're going to do, you can see up here at the top, direction number 1, is we're going to draw a cow. Our cow is going to have an ear, a long nose, and then it's going to come up to another ear. And then on top, we're going to draw a little head for our cow. The next thing we want to do is find all the factors of 36. So I'm going to write 36 inside of the cow's head. And in order to know how many factors there are, we can square root the number 36. So I'm going to square root the number 36. So the square root of 36 is 6. So that tells me that the biggest number I need to check to see if it's a factor is the number 6. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write those numbers out to the side here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we went a little bit out of our cow, but that's okay. The next thing I'm going to do is see out of these numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, which of them go into 36 evenly. So I'm going to start with 36, and I'm going to say, okay, 36 divided by 1 is 36. So one of my factors is 1 times 36. I'm going to do my next one, 36 divided by 2. 36 divided by 2 is 18, so I can do 2 times 18. I'm going to do my next one, 36 divided by 3. 36 divided by 3 is 12, so 12 is a factor. Okay, and here, it's a little hard to see, I'm making multiplication signs here. I'm going to try my next one, 36 divided by 4. 36 divided by 4 is 9, so 4 times 9 is one of our factors. And then I'm going to try 36 divided by 5. Okay, and when I do 36 divided by 5, I get 7.2. That's a decimal. And remember, factors are only whole numbers. There's numbers that divide evenly into another number. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cross out 5 because that's not one of our factors of 36. And then our last one, 36 divided by 6 is 6. So we have 6 times 6. So we have all of our factors listed out here in our factor cow. Once our factors are listed out, we're going to list out our factors so that it's in a long list. And a key point we need to write for when we write out our factors is that, so we're going to write our key point right above here. Key point, you list factors from least to greatest no repeats. So you list factors from least to greatest, no repeats. So I usually draw an arrow down the left side because that's where my lower numbers are. So I'm going to list out all of these numbers, and then I usually go back up the right side because that's where my higher numbers are. So we could say that the factors of 36 are, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not going to write the number 5 because 5 is not one of our factors. 6. I'm not going to write 6 again because 6 is, we've already written it once. So I'm not going to write this 6 right here. 9, 12, 18, and 36. So the factors of 36 are 9, 12, 18, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 9, 12, 18, and 36. Okay, let's do another example. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go over to example 2. Pause the video if you need to, write anything down. I'm going to zoom in for us. Okay, so now we want to find the factors of 45. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my factor cow. I'm going to put a little head on our cow, and I'm going to put the number 45 inside of our factor cow's head. Now we need to find what the square root of 45 is to know how big we want to go. And the square root of 45 is 6.7. 6.7. That tells me that the largest factor I should check is the number 7. So I'm going to write out my numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And the reason we went up to 7, and I want you to write a little arrow to this, you always round up. So for example, in the last example, we square rooted 36 and we got 6. That's easy. We're just going to go to 6. When you get something like 6.7, we're going to round up to the next number just to check it and make sure that that doesn't happen to be a factor. So now I'm going to see which of these numbers 1 through 7 go into 45. So I'm going to do 45 divided by 1, which is 45. So 1 times 45. 45 is one of our factors. I'm going to do 45 divided by 2, and 45 divided by 2, that is 22.5. Now remember, we don't want any decimals, so I'm going to cross out the 2. 2 is not one of our factors. 45 divided by 3, that gives me 15. So 3 times 15, that's one of our factors. 45 divided by 4, 45 divided by 4, that is 11.25. I do not want to have a decimal, so I'm going to go ahead and cross that out. I'm going to try 45 divided by 5. 45 divided by 5 is 9. So 5 times 9, that's one of our factors. I'm going to try 45 divided by 6. 45 divided by 6 is 7.5. I don't want a decimal, so 6 is not one of our factors. And 45 divided by 7, that gives me 6.4. And that's also decimal, so 7 is not one of our factors. So in this example, we ended up crossing out a lot of factors, but remember, we only want the ones that are whole numbers. We're looking for whole numbers, then those can be factors. Anything that's not a whole number cannot be a factor. So I'm going to go ahead and write out our answers, least to greatest, with no repeats. The factors of 45 are, 1, 3, 5. Notice on this left side, I skipped all the numbers I had crossed out. 1, 3, 5, 9, 15, and 45. And there are factors of 45. Alright, let's go ahead and try 2 on our own. So what I want you guys to do is I want you to practice 1 and practice 2 down below here. So go ahead and pause the video, press play when you're ready, and you can see the answers. Alright, here are the answers to practice 1 and practice 2. Go ahead, check your answers, pause the video if you need to, and we are going to go ahead and go on to another example. So if you need to pause the video at this point, do that now before we go on to our next example, which is on factor pairs. Okay, so what are factor pairs? Factor pairs are the two numbers whose product is our, we're running out a little bit of space, is our target number. The two numbers whose product is our target number. Now, to find factor pairs, we're going to do the exact same thing as when we find factors. We just write it a little bit differently. So I'm going to do one example for you, and then I'm going to have you try through on your own. So it says find all the factor pairs of 6. So we're going to find, essentially first, just find the factors. So draw your cow. I'm going to find, okay, what is the square root of 6? The square root of 6 is 2.4. So that means I'm going to go all the way up to 3. 1, 2, and 3. And say, okay, 6 divided by 1 is 6. So there's 1 times 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So there's 1. 2 times 3. And then lastly, 6 divided by 3 is 2, so times 2. Okay, now when we did this before, we would write out the factors. And if we were to write just the factors out, we would say, start on this side, go least to greatest, so 1, 2, 3. Remember, we're not going to repeat the 2 and the 3, and 6. These right here, these are the factors. Okay, so if it's asking you for factors, that's what we write. This is asking us for factor pairs. So how we write that is we just write out what are the pairs of factors. So our answer would actually be 1 times 6, it's my first factor pair. 2 times 3, that's my second factor pair. And 3 times 2, that's a repeat. Okay, think about what property is that. That 2 times 3 is the same as 3 times 2. That's the commutative property. We don't have to rewrite it. It means the same thing. So factor pairs are just writing out what the pairs are. 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. Those both give you 6. So these are factor pairs. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to try the next 3. I want you to try and do example 2 as well as practice 1 and practice 2. So try example 2, practice 1. Go ahead and pause the video, plus play when you're ready, and you can see what the answers were. Alright, here are your answers. So for example 2, our answers are here. Here are all our factor pairs. If you had it listed as 1 times 72 and 2 times 36, that's okay. It's okay if it's in a different order. Alright, and then practice 1, we just had 1 times 20, 2 times 10, and 4 times 5. And then this last one, practice 2, the only pair you should have had is 1 times 23. This is actually a prime number, which we'll talk about in our next objective, but prime numbers only have one factor, itself, and 1. So that's just a quick example of what a prime number would look like. Okay, next we're going to skip a couple of pages, and I'm going to teach you about the GCF. And there's a lot of critical thinking questions that we're skipping over right now that we are going to do in class. So be prepared, and we're going to turn to our page that says GCF, or greatest common factor. So to page 4 in our notes where it says greatest common factor, or GCF. And this is the last thing we're going to take notes on today. And then when you come into class, we'll kind of take it up to the next level and talk about some different critical thinking things that we can do with factors and factor pairs and greatest common factors. So, greatest common factor is something you'll see a lot, and then usually when you see it, it's going to be abbreviated as GCF. Okay? Greatest common factor, GCF. And let's first just break down greatest common factor. So think about what are some words that we know that are like greatest common and factor. So when I hear the word greatest, I think the biggest. When I think of number common, I think of they both have. And when I think of factor, I think of divides evenly. Okay, I also think of cow, because our cow is going to remind us, oh, greatest common factor, those are the numbers we multiply together to get another number. So we're looking for the biggest number that both numbers have that are factors that divide evenly. So a definition that we can write out would be the greatest common factor is the biggest number that divides evenly into our target numbers. The biggest number that divides evenly into our target numbers. So let's go through a couple of examples, and I think it will start to make sense what the GCF is and how it's going to work. So I'm going to go down here where it says example 1. And our question says, find the greatest common factor, or the GCF, of 12 and 20. Now, when you see greatest, you should think the biggest, okay? You should be thinking biggest. When you see factor, you should be thinking cow. Okay, I know it sounds silly, but think of a cow because that's going to make you think, oh, these are the numbers that I multiply together to get factors. Those are what factors are. When we introduce the concept of multiples, it's really easy to get the two confused. So it's important to remember factor, cow. Cow is factor. Factors are things you multiply together. So our steps are very similar to just finding the factors, except now we have two numbers. So our first thing we're going to do, step one, is we're going to draw both cows. So I'm going to draw a cow for 12 first. Draw my cow for 12. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take the square root of 12, which is 3.4. So I know that I need to go up to 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to go ahead and divide up my numbers. 12 divided by 1 is 12. So 12 is a factor. 12 divided by 2 is 6, so 6 is a factor. 12 divided by 3 is 4, so 4 is a factor. And 12 divided by 4 is 3, so 3 is a factor. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw my cow for 20. So the square root of 20 is 4.4. So I know I need to go all the way up to 4. So up to 5. 2, 3, 4, 5. And 20 divided by 1 is 20. So times 20. 20 divided by 2 is 10. So times 10. 20 divided by 3. When I do 20 divided by 3, I get a decimal. 6.6. That means 3 is not a factor. 20 divided by 4 is 5. So times 5. And 20 divided by 5 is 4. Okay, now that we have our two factor cows, our next step is we're going to write out all the factors we have, from least to greatest, just like we did before. So, my first one, 12. All the factors of 12 we had 1, 2, 3, 4. Remember, we don't write repeats, so I'm not going to write this 3 or this 4, 6, and 12. And then I'm going to do the same for 20. I'm going to write all the factors of 20. 1, 2. I'm not going to write 3 because it wasn't a factor. 4, 5. I'm not going to write this 4 or 5 because they're repeats. 10, 20. Now, we're looking for the greatest common factor. What that means is we're looking for a factor that both 12 and 20 have in common. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to circle all the numbers they have in common. They have a 1 in common, a 2, a 4, and that's it. Now, the GCF is going to be the biggest number they have in common, and I'm looking, and 4 is our biggest number. So we can say is that the GCF of 12 and 20 is 4. The GCF of 12 and 20 is 4, and that is our answer. Okay, so it's very similar to finding factors, except now you're finding two factors. Making two factor trees and finding what they have in common. Alright, let's do another example, and then you'll have a little bit of time to practice. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on example number 2. And again, I have find the greatest common factor of 24 and 4. So I want to find the number that they both have in common, the biggest factor they both have in common. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make two cows. One for 24. And one for 4. I want you to go ahead, pause the video, and try to fill in these cows on your own. Okay, find the factors of 24, find the factors of 4, and then when you're ready, press play, and we will see if we got the same factors. Okay, so we have all our factors for 24 and 4. Now, next thing we want to do is we're going to write all our factors out. So, first, the factors of 24. We had 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not going to write out 5 because that wasn't a factor. 6, 8, 12, and 24. So there's all our factors of 24. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write out the factors of 4. We had 1, 2, and 4. The next thing I'm going to do is look for factors that they had in common. They have 1 in common, they have 2 in common, and they have 4 in common. Now we're looking for the greatest common factor, the biggest factor they have in common between them, and the biggest one is 4. So my GCF of 24 and 4 is 4. Okay, my GCF of 24 and 4 is 4. Okay, we've done 2 examples. So what I want you guys to do now is try a practice or 2. So what I want you to do is go ahead and pause the video. Try practice 1 and 2. When you're ready, press play. And you can see the answers and see what you should have gotten. Alright, here are your answers for practice 1 and practice 2. So for practice 1, you should have had a GCF of 24 and 26 is 2. And for practice 2, you should have had that the GCF of 54 and 81 is 27. Alright, I want you to do one more example. And that's a kind of example where you're given 3 numbers. So you have to find a GCF of 3 different numbers. So we're going to go ahead and go a little bit farther in our notes so we can see an example where there are 3 different numbers. And let's look at something like example 4. Something like example 4 here. This says find the GCF of 18, 42, and 30. Now, that looks a little scary because we have 3 numbers, but I want you to try this, and what you're going to have to do is make 3 factor cows. You're going to make a factor cow for 18, make a factor cow for 42, and make a factor cow for 30. Right? I want you to go ahead and make those factor cows and then list out the factors. Once you've done that, press play, and we'll kind of go over what the answer will look like and how we find our answer and how we really decipher what the answer is going to be when you're given 3 numbers like that. And so go ahead and pause the video and press play when you're ready. Okay, so here are the different factors that you should have listed out for 18, 42, and 30. So go ahead, take a moment. I want you to check and make sure you have the right factors listed out. Okay. Now, we should go through. Because this has 3 numbers, they have to have all 3 in common. So I'm going to look. They all have a 1 in common. They all have a 2 in common. They all have a 3 in common. Now, 18 and 42 have a 6, but 30 does not, so we're not going to count that. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Oh, it actually does have a 6 in common, so I am going to count that. They all have a 6 in common. They don't have a 9 or a 7 or a 10, an 18 and 14 and 15, a 21, a 42, and a 30. Okay, and then we start to not. Because they all 3 have a 6 in common, the GCF is going to be the GCF of 18, 42, and 30 is 6. Okay? So when you're given 3 numbers, you don't have to change your strategy, but you do just need to figure out what number is in common for all 3. Okay, that's the end of our video for Objective 106. Write down any questions that you might have and come to class ready to practice.